Welcome to One Last Take, a podcast about seeing film from every angle. I'm Wes Skinner, and on today's episode, I'll be reviewing Spielberg's latest sci-fi experiment, my most anticipated action movie of the year, and a wacky comedy about a train full of drag queens. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the show, where I cover new theatrical releases and anything else I feel like watching in the last week or so. This week, I didn't see much outside the theater, but between the three movies I did see, there is no shortage of stuff to talk about. This batch is by far an upgrade from last week, and a proper step towards what I'd like to see from summer movies. I don't think any of these will turn into the most talked about movies at the end of the year, but I do think it adds a nice bit of spice and variety to the summer's offerings. And just one piece of housekeeping before we move forward. For anyone who's been tuning in regularly, I'm going to be releasing episodes sometime between Thursday and Friday every week. I toyed with the idea of Wednesday just to make it a little closer to the previous weekend, but that was becoming a little unrealistic on my part with the schedule. So this way it gives me just enough time to see everything, jot down my thoughts, and record and edit before moving on to catch the next week of new releases. So for anyone who's been tuning in so far and dealing with the roller coaster of constant schedule changes and things like that I've been doing, I promise you things are finally getting a little more regular. Now with that out of the way, let's get started. Hands down, the biggest release of the weekend was Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day, a movie I was, we'll say, more hopeful for than confident or optimistic. I should preface my review of this movie by saying that despite being a lifelong cinephile, Spielberg hasn't always been my cup of tea. Now, before you turn the podcast off, that's not to say I think he's a poor director or overrated. Believe me, I understand the hype around this guy and his filmography, and I think his understanding of the craft is second to none. It's just the actual stories he chooses to tell and how he chooses to tell them that I occasionally brush up against. This is all to say that when a new Spielberg movie comes out, my expectations are probably a lot more neutral than most. I don't expect to be blown away out of my theater chair, but I also don't hold him to the impossible standard of his older films. I usually anticipate a very watchable film with a few high highs that I walk away glad I saw, but ultimately it won't stick with me forever. Now this one stars Emily Blunt as Margaret, a reporter with strange new abilities, and Josh O'Connor as Daniel, an employee of a secret government agency called Wardex. As their respective paths slowly lead to a crossroads, and the entire world nears World War III, it becomes clear the secrets Daniel's forced to cover up and Margaret's newfound powers are inherently linked, leading them both to a conclusion that is going to change the world as we know it forever. I'm going to start by spoiling one element of the plot here, because for one, it's kind of a hard thing not to address, and two, the trailer sort of spoiled it already, so if you don't want to hear anything, just skip forward a few minutes, but here we go. The movie is about aliens. Spielberg, a guy who's always been obsessed with aliens, has yet again made a very Spielberg movie about aliens. I wanted to get this out of the way because the movie itself, to a certain point at least, attempts to hide that from the audience, but I think it's pretty obvious from the jump. In fact, just about everything Spielberg has expressed a fascination with over the years, from religion to empathy to futuristic technology, has made its way into this movie, making a bit of a Spielberg stew. The characters, the plot, the action set pieces, they all kind of feel like an amalgamation of elements from other better Spielberg films. In many ways, this feels intentional. Despite its many flaws, which we'll get to, there's a clear attempt to launch the audience back into the 90s with old-school blockbuster thrills, and for the most part, that aspect of it works. If the only question you needed answered about this movie is does it feel like old Spielberg, then I'll tell you right now the answer is yes. But whether or not it actually works outside of the nostalgic warmth it evokes is another story entirely. Now, if we're just going based off of technical merit alone, the performances, the musical score, the cinematography, and the direction all deliver, as they should. Spielberg has assembled a superhero team of craftsmen for this thing, including his longtime cinematographer Janusz Kaminski and the nearly century-old legendary composer John Williams. And when all of these elements collide, they make for some magical moments on the screen that are easily some of the best of the year. These moments are further elevated by dedicated performances from a fairly stacked ensemble, including Colin Firth as the relentless antagonist, and Wyatt Russell as Margaret's believable boyfriend, not to mention Coleman Domingo as the radical true believer who feels like a stand-in for Spielberg himself. But the performance that truly kept me invested was Emily Blunt as Margaret. We get just enough time with her before the proverbial shit hits the fan to understand who her character is, before we're whisked off into the most exciting chapter of the film that sees Margaret grappling with her new reality. I won't spoil anything else in the film, I promise, but where her story goes and what that character experiences acts as a vessel for the conversations about empathy and desperate pleas for universal understanding that Spielberg has always used his stories to express. There are moments at risk coming across as corny, especially in today's cynical age, but it's almost admirable how stubbornly optimistic Spielberg is. So you might be thinking that despite my disclaimer at the beginning, I'm actually sounding pretty positive on this movie, and maybe you're waiting for the criticism. Well, pretty much everything negative I have to say begins and ends with the screenplay by David Koepp. As a frequent collaborator with Spielberg, his results have been sort of mixed. On one hand, you have Jurassic Park. On the other hand, you have Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. Yeah. From what I can glean from Koepp as a writer on his former works, Disclosure Day feels like his worst instincts have fully taken over. He knows how to generate momentum, moving from plot point to plot point at a brisk pace. But how the movie gets there is often clunky, unearned, or flat-out disorienting. For every moment that would be a Spielberg classic in a vacuum, it's immediately followed up with some awkward tonal shift or a convenience where the characters seemingly use magic to escape from a given predicament. The use of the film's MacGuffin is borderline egregious here, seemingly making up its various uses and capabilities on the spot. This wouldn't be a big deal if it was even briefly explained or if there was some grand purpose of it in the plot, but unless I missed it, there just really isn't. Still, Spielberg manages to mine as much Spielberginess out of every scene he can. When the organization hunting our main characters isn't bumbling around as they do for much of the movie's runtime, there are a few choice set pieces that are propulsive in ways that movies rarely are nowadays. One scene involving a train, for instance, is simply breathtaking, and I do wish the rest of the film was able to keep up that pace. Sadly, the wind is sort of taken out of the film's sails anytime we're forced to cut back to exposition dumps, bullet pointing every alien conspiracy theory ever conceived, or in the film's most unnecessary detour following Eve Hewson's Jane struggling with her faith amid the realization that aliens are real. This part of the film actually had potential to be interesting, with a philosophical debate at the core of it, but the screenplay seems intent on deciding the conclusion for us, rather than leaving it a question mark, which I would find far more compelling. The big tipping point for a lot of people in either a positive or negative way will be the film's ending, or really the entire final 20 minutes or so. To be as vague as humanly possible, it's an ending that relies a lot on whether or not you buy a certain shift in the central conflict of the film. It's a perspective inherent in Spielberg's work that I personally think works better as an artifact of the 70s and 80s than it does in today's modern cynical world. Not that cynical movies weren't made in the 70s and 80s, but you know what I mean. Disclosure Day is merely the echo of old Spielberg rather than a full-on return to form. And for some, I think that will be more than enough. Hell, Spielberg's B-sides are still a lot more enjoyable than many directors at their best. On the surface, it's got everything you could ask for in terms of big screen thrills, and there's enough to chew on thematically, even if it feels shoehorned in from time to time. Long story short, I'm not going to complain about a master still doing his thing at almost 80 years old. Even if I was ultimately mixed on the film, the fact that I couldn't even take my eyes off the screen to go pee is proof that the man still got it, even if he's not making another Schindler's List or Jurassic Park anytime soon. So the same day I saw Disclosure Day, I immediately followed it up with what is quite possibly the most polar opposite movie I could imagine. Adam Shankman's Stop That Train. It's probably a massive understatement to say that Shankman is no Spielberg. He thrived in the early 2000s where Vin Diesel being a babysitter was all you needed for a comedic premise, and Steve Martin was in his slumming it era. Yeah, it was a dark time for comedies, but I'm both surprised and delighted to say that decades later, Shankman's latest shows him applying his knack for unabashedly stupid comedy to a screenplay that actually knows how to use it. That's all to say that Stop That Train is goofy, ridiculous, dumb as hell, and honestly kind of awesome. It stars drag queens Ginger Minge and Jujubee as close friends and train stewardesses who find themselves jobless due to their rail line Stank Rail being closed for good. However, they soon find that the luxurious Glamazonian Express just lost 2 trained stewardesses, and they sneak in under the guise of new hires for the ride of their dreams. That is until they learn that a violent storm, or rather a stormaganza, is headed their way. You can probably tell already that this movie is nuts. It announces itself immediately with deadpan humor and absurdist touches that let you know the movie will do just about anything for a joke. And that's sort of the excitement of it. See, unlike Scary Movie, these jokes come fast and furious and from unexpected places, so even when one doesn't fully land, it's followed up by a joke that does. In some ways, it feels like a send-up of stupid comedies while committing all of the same sins and somehow getting away with it. For example, the movie is loaded with cameos, but one of the greatest ongoing jokes in the movie is that Sarah Michelle Gellar is there as herself for the whole time, and not a single person recognizes her or gives a shit that she's there. The movie commits to these types of things so relentlessly that even if you see the punchlines coming, it kind of becomes hard not to give in and just laugh anyways. It helps that everyone on set seems to be having a total blast, especially leads Ginger and Jujubee, and of course RuPaul as none other than the President of the United States. It's almost like you're just watching a bunch of friends be ridiculous and make each other laugh for an hour and a half. Make no mistake, this is by no means a comedic masterpiece, but it's a hell of a good time and makes for a great watch with friends. So if you need something to break up all the darkness in the real world and in movies today, I highly recommend it. And finally, we have the main attraction of the week, and for myself, one of the main attractions of the year, Kenji Tanagaki's martial arts, I'm just gonna say it, masterpiece, The Furious. As I mentioned in my martial arts episode, this genre means a lot to me, and we're lucky if we get one truly great one every decade or so. Well, after waiting for this movie since its premiere at TIFF last year, I can confidently say this is the latest to join those ranks. The film follows a silent handyman played by Shay Miao, whose daughter is kidnapped into a child trafficking ring. Unfortunately for everyone involved, this handyman knows Kung Fu, and it isn't long before he encounters a journalist played by Joe Taslim, whose own wife has disappeared while investigating the criminals. As soon as they learn they're on the same side, they team up to find their loved ones and tear down the corrupt organization, one broken bone at a time. With a Japanese director and actors from China, Indonesia, and Thailand, the film pools talent from across Asia and is both a tribute and victory lap for everything the continent as a whole has contributed to the action genre over the decades. Taslim and the ever-watchable Yahya and Ruhin are both alums of what is arguably the last unimpeachable masterpiece of the genre, the Raid Redemption and the Raid 2 collectively. It's for this reason I was most looking forward to seeing them, but real-life wushu champion Shay Mao is an equal standout here, with his insane physical prowess and magnetic presence. In fact, the cast is so stacked that if I had to pick a single star of the film, it would have to be the utterly mind-blowing choreography that allows them all to shine. Brian Lee, who plays a memorable henchman, uses his truck-like physique to launch himself into his opponents, his fighting style resembling what I can only describe as part frog, part wrecking ball. The aforementioned Ruhian, who plays a villainous archer, gets to show off his skills by using a bow and arrow in ways I don't think anyone who invented the weapon could conceive. As for our leads, Taslim gets to tenderize enemies with a scrappy defensive style, while Miao takes them out with a precision that is as efficient as it is graceful. Giving all of these characters such a unique physical flair and personality during the fight sequences makes up for the lack of traditional character development or storytelling. Each set piece has its own natural narrative rhythm, and while it all moves at breakneck speed, there is enough progression and variety to keep it from ever feeling tedious. I love this movie because it doesn't kid its audience. They know you're here for the action, and if you aren't, you're watching the wrong movie. I think it's harder for casual American audiences to gel with this style of action because most classic American action movies still try to tell a regular story while doing the action thing. Movies like The Furious, on the other hand, have a setup, and then it's set piece after set piece, rolling down a hill and snowballing and raising the stakes until we reach a grand finale. You could say this stuff goes back to the beginning of the motion picture, the silent era, where we used newfound technology to capture extraordinary feats of physicality in the vein of Buster Keaton, and of course that evolved much later with Jackie Chan. That DNA of cinema's roots, while only manifesting in certain genres like martial arts and musicals, has always been there. So while some viewers may question why these fights are going on for so long and why they're 90% of the movie, others like myself will watch this like performance art, watching in awe as they come up with thousands of creative ways to knock people out and use just about anything as a weapon. The film also manages to set the bar high from the top and somehow raise it incrementally throughout, until we reach an absolute fever dream of a finale. I don't use these words lightly when I say that it's an instant classic in the genre and a masterclass in choreography, stunt work, and visual storytelling. I wish I could fast forward life to 6 months from now where I own the 4K and can play the scene on repeat, just breaking down every kick, punch, and instance of one person being thrown into another. I suppose if I wanted to pick apart every aspect of the film as a whole, the dialogue and awkward ADR are jarring at times. But that stuff never registers for me. I grew up having to endure the most poorly dubbed VHS tapes to enjoy this stuff. I believe in strictly judging a movie based on what it's trying to do, and I think for an action-packed extravaganza, this is about as good as it gets. I can't sing the praises of the technical aspects of this film enough, and I promise if this is even remotely your thing, you'll feel the same way. And those are my thoughts on the movies of the week. Next week should be more of an extensive episode since I'll be covering Toy Story 5, The Death of Robin Hood, and Leviticus, on top of a few older movies I have in the queue that I've been meaning to check out for a while. As always, you can check out more of my movie thoughts at one_last_take on Letterboxd, and thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.